It's late. It's time for bed, and I will tell you the tale of King Arthur from the things that never were. Arthur, the King of England, story shows that even the most gallant knights may fall victim to base emotions. He was the son of the strange liaison between King Arthur and dear Duchess of Cornwall. Arthur fell so violently in love with her, he persuaded Merlin the magician to change him into a replica of the Duke, so that he might enter her castle and enter her bed. Arthur's men killed the Duke before her son was born. Merlin predicted an unhappy fate for the infant. He said that the enemies would kill him and put an end to the rule of his lineage. To avoid this fate, she surrendered her newborn son to Merlin, the magician, gave him to the noble knight Sir Ector, who had the boy christened as Arthur, and brought him to him as his own son. Sir Ector taught Arthur all the knightly skills and virtues, and the boy grew into a splendid, fair-haired youth, expert in weaponry, but gracious and fair to his henchmen. England was in its usual state of perpetual war. The king, now old and ailing, had to fight off the alliance of the northern kings. He defeated them at the Battle of St. Albans. The effort was too great for him, and he lay dying. Merlin called to him to declare Arthur his successor. The king's last words were, "I give him God's blessing and my own, and bid him pray for my soul and claim the crown." The king's knights had never heard of Arthur. They refused to accept an unknown youth as king, especially since many of them also laid claim to the throne. Merlin tricked them by converting the appearance of a sword thrust into the great anvil, and on the sword written the letters in gold, "Whoso pull this sword, bear right to the king of all Britain." Each of the rebellious knights swaggered up to the anvil to strain and tug at the sword, but they coughed when the sword of the slender youth who also stepped up for his turn. When Arthur drew the sword from the anvil, they roared angrily that he must be a fairy's child. Said he had been cast up to the beach by a golden wave. When Arthur claimed the crown and invited them to a great feast, they replied they would give him gifts of hard sores betwixt the shoulders. As to the challenge enlisting Sir Ector, Oculus of the faithful knights to follow him, he fought the rebels in a series of battles and showed such strength and skill that they bowed the knee to him. In one battle he broke the sword that he had drawn from the anvil. Merlin led him to a lonely lake where a hand arose from the water, holding another sword. The lady of the lake appeared to Arthur and told him that he might have the sword. Excalibur, and his magical weapon always ensured victory in Arthur's defense of the realm and conquest of the pagans. Arthur soon proved himself the greatest warrior and general in all of Europe. The knights who once resented him soon gloried in his victories. Under his command they fought with unbeatable strength and spirit. First in Britain, where they slashed their way through invading hordes of Scots and Irishmen, and then in Europe, where they conquered Arthur's magnificent court at Camelot, attracted every knight in the nation, eager to prove himself in battle and tournament. The fierce young men fought each other with lances and swords onto the turning ground, but accepted Arthur's rules of chivalry, in which they swore fidelity to Arthur and the faith of the Christ. Their rules of battle. The old magician Merlin always stood behind Arthur as his advisor, but as the new king grew in strength and power, he did not always heed Merlin's warnings. He ignored Merlin's advice that he should not marry Genevieve, the most beautiful woman in Britain. Arthur's best knight and dearest friend Sir Lancelot was also in love with her, but foresaw the triangle would inevitably lead to disaster. But Arthur's desire for Guinevere was so great that he refused to surrender her to his friend, and they married in a grand ceremony. Arthur was more impressed by Merlin's Camelot's prediction that van forth the day of May Day would bring him to disaster. He ordered all male children born on May Day should be brought to Camelot, but the ship in which they traveled was wrecked, and only one survived. He was Madrid, Arthur's nephew, who was washed onto the beach and brought up by a good man until he could present himself in court. Arthur received him gladly, ignoring Merlin's warnings that he was a traitor. Under Arthur's rule, his kingdom seemed to enter a new golden age. But there was one flaw upon his people. This was the loss of the Holy Grail, the vessel from which Christ ate at the Last Supper. Joseph of Armenia brought the Grail to Britain, but it had not been seen for many years. Then there could only be no lasting peace or prosperity until the Grail had been seen again. But the Grail may be seen only by those who are flawless in soul and in spirit. And Arthur doubted whether he or any of his knights might claim such perfection. While he pondered these matters, a new knight, Prince Galahad, joined his court. Galahad was a young man of surpassing strength, grace, and beauty, but other knights noticed that he carried no weapon, and that his scroll was empty. Just as Galahad began introducing to them, the squire would confront miraculous news. A great stone floated on the river below Camelot, and in that stone the sword glittering jeweled hilt. Inscribed upon it were the words, "No man shall take me hence, but only you, whose by side lie on to hang. He shall be the best knight in the world." Once more the knights vied with each other for the release of the miraculous sword. Galahad was the only one to draw the sword from the stone. As he thrust it into his sheath, the other knights saw that happening as a sign that they should now go forth in search of the Holy Grail. 150 of Arthur's greatest company bound themselves to the quest and left Camelot in the cavalry brilliant, flashing with their arms and armor, and the colors of their shields and banners. Many died on their adventure, whilst others grew weary and drifted back to Camelot. Sir Lancelot returned, broken with sorrow, because he had just been about to see the Grail when it was shut out from his sight. The perfection of his knighthood was flawed by his secret desire for Queen Guinevere. Only the knight Galahad, Martin, and courage continued the search. After fearful adventures, they found Joseph of Armenia, who showed them the Holy Grail. He was overcome by such joy that he prayed to be taken up to heaven, and this flawless knight was raised up by a host of angels. Provincial for craving for Galahad died, Sir Herman, of course, returned to Camelot with the news that the quest had ended. It seemed that the golden age might now begin, but Merlin's deadly predictions still held to be unfulfilled. His crown, he conspired to destroy the faith and fellowship between Arthur and the knights. He spread rumors about the relationship between Lancelot and Guinevere, and persuaded 12 knights they must kill Lancelot to preserve the honor of the queen. The death of Lancelot, Arthur's greatest friend and supporter, would spill the brotherhood of Camelot and have Mordred gain the crown. But Lancelot slew all 12 knights in a furious combat. Mordred would have been foiled if Arthur had not shown a flaw in his own nature. He was jealous of Lancelot's attraction for Guinevere, and he believed that the gossip of his nephew was an ill-linked legion. In his fury at her alleged unfaithfulness, he ordered the knights to have her burnt at the stake. The lamenting crowd of Camelot folk saw her led forth to death, but even as the flames licked her garments, Lancelot charged into the rescue. He cut his way through the guards, killed the guards, and galloped off with Guinevere to his castle in a joyous court. Bloody battles between the supporters of Arthur and of Lancelot now racked the kingdom. Those who had once feasted together at Camelot turned their swords against each other. The slaughter continued until the folk ordered Arthur to make peace, and that he might soon have done it, if Sir Gawain and the brother of Guinevere had not Arthur's jealousy of Lancelot alive. Lancelot left Guinevere and fled to Brittany, but Arthur followed with a great force of men at arms. His absence gave Richard the chance to claim the crown. He spread word that Arthur had died in battle and demanded that Guinevere should marry him. But Arthur heard of news, and he hasted back to Britain, and fought 2 more battles with his nephew. In the second of these fightings ceased when Arthur and Modred arranged a parley and met between the armies to discuss terms of peace. His nephew agreed to content himself with the dukedom of Kent and Cornwall if he might succeed to the throne after the death of Arthur. The king agreed, and it seemed that peace was in sight when a snake slithered from the grasp of one of the knights standing behind Arthur. He drew his sword to kill it, but both sides took the signal to renew the battle. They had fought so savagely that in the evening only his nephew still stood with the corpses on one side, and Arthur, Lucan, and Guinevere on the other. Arthur ran and murdered with his spear, and even as he ran through, his enemy received a fatal wound. As Arthur's strength ebbed, then he ordered Richard to throw the sword right into the nearby lake. As the sword fell towards the dark stars, his hand rose out of the waters and caught it, and brandished it to the times, and vanished into the lake. Guinevere then carried the dying king to the edge of the sad waters, where a black-draped boat occupied by 3 mourning women awaited him. They took Arthur aboard and sailed with him to the Isle of Avalon, where he lies to the people of Britain have viewed him again. That is the story